Watching scary films during October is the best way to get into the Halloween spirit. But when the movie you're watching is not just fiction, but a retelling of true events, the spookiness really hits. Welcome to the last episode of the Creepy Archives, the October series where we've explored some of the creepiest events, media, and places. If you've missed any of the previous episodes, check out the playlist below. In this last episode, we'll be taking a look at the true crime cases that served as an inspiration for two of the most famous Halloween horror movies. If there's an image we have associated to Halloween, it's the Ghostface mask, which became popular after the 1996 release of the film Scream. The Scream series follows the story of a series of murders committed by a killer in disguise who stalks his victims before slashing them to death. The original 1996 release is one of the highest grossing films in the slasher horror genre and has claimed its place as a Halloween classic.
No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
But the original script that paved the way for Scream was not all fiction. Screenwriter Kevin Williamson based the story on the murders of the Gainesville Ripper. Over the course of 4 days in August of 1990, Danny Rolling, who would later be known as the Gainesville Ripper, murdered 5 students after breaking into their apartments in Gainesville, Florida. In all cases, he operated in the same way. He would break into the apartments through a balcony door or window, quietly make his way through the rooms, and stab his victims after tying them up, torturing, and assaulting them. He would then mutilate the bodies and pose them around the room. The murder spree went on for 4 days. When it hit the media, many students went into full panic, and some even decided to leave the University of Florida, where the murders were taking place. Investigators seemed to be having a hard time finding any leads, since there was hardly any evidence left behind, and even the bodies seemed to be clean. However, since the case was so public, it wasn't long before police received some interesting information. Authorities in Louisiana contacted investigators with information about an unsolved triple homicide which happened a few months prior to the Gainesville murders, in November of 1989. 3 family members had been murdered in their home by an intruder who broke in while they were getting ready to have dinner. Father, daughter, and grandchild had been stabbed to death, and their bodies, just like the Gainesville cases, had been posed. The similarities between both cases were compelling, and upon further inspection they found more evidence that possibly linked both cases together. There was leftover duct tape on the bodies and traces of vinegar used to clean the scene. But the real tip came from a neighbor in Shreveport, the city where the triple homicide had taken place. She told authorities they needed to look into a man, Danny Rolling. After hearing about the murders in Florida, and the way the killer had stabbed the victims, posed their bodies, and nearly all the victims were female, this neighbor said it reminded her of Danny Rolling. After the family of 3 was murdered in Shreveport, many suspected Danny had something to do. He was a disturbed man who had made comments about liking to stab people, and how he wanted to lay under the sun where the beautiful women were, so he could watch them. Although he was never officially connected to the homicide, many suspected he had something to do with it. So when the news of similar murders taking place hit the news, this concerned neighbor thought she should report it just in case. It didn't take long for investigators to find Danny. He was being held for an armed robbery he committed just 10 days after the murders at the University of Florida, at a local supermarket. They checked the belongings Rolling had on him when he was arrested, and some of them matched the marks left at the scene of the murders, such as the screwdriver he used to break into the apartments. But the most chilling piece of evidence were a series of diary entries he recorded on a tape where he spoke about the crimes and apologized to his family. Danny Rolling was sentenced to death for the murder of 8 people, and after pleading guilty to all charges, he was executed in October of 2006. Although the Scream saga is not a retelling of Danny Rolling's crimes, his story heavily inspired the original script about a stalker that terrorized and murdered several students in a small town. As far as horror films go, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an absolute classic. Not only has it become a cult phenomenon, but it set the foundations of many elements we've seen in horror and slasher films in the past 50 years. In the 1974 story, a group of friends are traveling towards an old family home when they encounter a family of cannibals who have all sorts of human-made objects in their home. The group begin to get murdered and tortured by the flesh-eating family. Although the plot is hard to believe, the events of the film were loosely based on one of the most disturbing cases in the United States, the murders of Ed Gein. In 1957, the police of Plainfield, Wisconsin were investigating the disappearance of Bernice Warden, the owner of a local hardware shop. She was last seen working at her store, and while investigating the scene, police found the last receipt signed by Bernice was made out to Ed Gein, a local farmer. Everything pointed at Gein being the last one to see Bernice, so a warrant was issued to search his farm. What police found there left them speechless. Bernice's body was found in a shed, hanging by her ankles and completely cut open. But that's not the only thing they found. As they walked around Gein's house, they stumbled upon dozens of objects and clothing made from human remains. Bowls, cups, masks, furniture, a whole array of objects made from other people's flesh and bones. One of the main characters in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is Leatherface, who wears a mask made of human flesh. This is the main connection the film does with Ed Gein's case, and it seems that Leatherface was heavily inspired by Ed Gein's disturbing hobby. When questioned about it, Gein admitted he had been doing this for years. He would visit graveyards and exhume the bodies of recently deceased women. After losing his mother, Gein never moved on, and he would wear the skin of these corpses as suits to, in a way, become his mother. Although several human remains were found in his property, he was only tried for one count of murder. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was ruled incompetent to stand trial. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity and was sent to a series of maximum security mental institutions, where he spent the rest of his life until he passed away from lung cancer in 1984 at the age of 77. The objects made from human flesh and bones were destroyed, but his story was so haunting that it inspired one of the most famous horror films in history. What other horror movies inspired by true stories have you heard of? Leave your recommendations in the comments. Thank you for tuning into the Creepy Archives. All the episodes are gathered in a dedicated playlist, so if you missed any of them, make sure you check it out. I hope you have a safe and fun Halloween, and I will see you in the next video.